So good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. My name is Joshua Bowling. Thanks for coming to my talk about using informal tabletops to build better teams and processes. A bit of a cumbersome title, but it's going to be really talking about a sort of easy sort of training exercise you can do with your team or with your analysts to make them more proficient at their job and sort of build those mental heuristics and cognitive processes that lead to better analysts overall. So with that, let's kick it off. So agenda, the agenda for this talk, I'm going to go talk a little bit about who I am, why should you even listen to what I have to say, an overview of what a tabletop exercise is for those of you who have not had the good fortune to participate in one or are not a manual fiend like I am and don't read NISTs or joint pubs on a regular basis. A few of the pitfalls and gaps that traditional tabletops have, my recommended solution to build something a little bit more manageable for your team, how to run a tiny tabletop, and then sort of the after you've run it, what should you be doing? So, like I said, my name is Josh Bowling. I'm currently a senior defense security analyst at SpectreOps. SpectreOps is a cybersecurity company that provides consulting services related to adversary simulation, adversary detection, SOC maturity assessments, and a new purple teaming option that we've just rolled out. A lot of very talented people, a lot of way smarter than me, which is glorious to have a great place to work. I've got over 10 years of experience in both IT and cybersecurity in both DoD and private sector, and I am a Marine vet. Most of that experience does come from being in the Marine Corps. I've started out as a wire dog, so I know everything from inside, outside plant and voice and video telephony to where I finally wound up after moving into doing defensive cyberspace operations. And my last gig was as the cyber incident response team chief for the Marine Corps at the Marine Corps Cyberspace Operations Group, which is where I got introduced to the joy of participating in a tabletop exercise multiple times because my boss did not want to be part of them. I'm also a tabletop RPG fan, and I DM a Dungeons & Dragons campaign on the side, a tidbit that will sort of become more clear why I'm dropping that tidbit here in a bit. So what's a tabletop exercise? I've got the NIST definition up there for those of you who care to know the proper definition. But generally, a tabletop exercise is going to be a high-level sort of walkthrough or talk through of a particular kind of incident that your organization is concerned about. So usual suspects are going to be things like ransomware events, continuity of operations where there's been some sort of like major disaster within the area. How does your company go through its backups, get secondary sites online, assignment of roles, who's doing what. The thing that sort of like distinguishes a tabletop exercise from other sorts of live assessments is going to be that it is very much document and discussion driven, right? There's going to be a facilitator who sort of lays out the scenario, guides the discussion, but generally speaking, you aren't going to have hands-on keyboard simulation necessarily. You can partner it with it, which is frequently a great way to validate your tabletop as well, but generally it's going to be more of a paper walkthrough and talk through of how different teams or functions would be responding during a particular type of incident. So the benefits, like they are, I don't want to come down all doom and gloom on tabletops. They are a great tool for organizations and enterprises when applied correctly, right? They are great for ensuring that your documented plans and responses are there and allow people to sort of test those assumptions and those ideas and ensure that across the org and all of those key areas that need to be responding to some incidents are on the same page, right? It's a great way to highlight those cross-org processes and interdependencies. Right? So again, I'm going to be coming at this mostly from a cybersecurity perspective, but you can easily apply it for the IT world as well, just in general. If the sort of like roles and responsibilities are a little split where like your cybersecurity team is the one who identifies that certain accounts need to be disabled or quarantined or shut to the side, but the actual containment efforts are performed by your server admins, your network engineers, it's important that everyone be on the same page that, hey, those are the people doing this. It's not just the cyber team all by themselves. or it's not just the network engineers or the server admins going, wild, wild west necessarily. They're also great for validating those assumptions, right? I'm sure anyone who has had to write one of these, like just draft a document or an SOP for responding to a kind of incident, knows that whenever you have to talk with the other teams, it frequently points out holes in things that you thought were either implicit knowledge or were just how things work. And then you talk with another team, again, typically going to be a network or a server guy being like, no, actually, we don't handle that. That's this third team that you didn't even know existed. So it's a great way to get that feedback across these different teams, and a great way to identify gaps or weaknesses in your existing processes and plans. Sort of going off that same scenario I'm throwing out there, right? Of if something isn't fully documented or the roles and responsibilities for responding to a certain type of incident aren't there, the worst time to find out is in the middle of a live incident, right? If your ransomware playbook says that you will isolate a network segment, the time to figure out, hey, is that going to be the network admins or is that going to be your cybersecurity team, is not in the middle of a ransomware incident and trying to figure out how are you going to do the containment effort. Really, no one likes to do that when everything's on fire. You like to have that more or less laid out ahead of time. So again, they're great for organizations, lovely tool. What's the problem? What's my gripe here? Big chunk of it is that these things, because they are generally cross-functional at a broad level, right? You're going to get HR, you're going to get IT, you're going to get cyber, you're going to get various like managerial aspects looped in, any procurement or acquisitions guys. That coordination is a serious coordination problem, and getting everyone together just to talk is often slightly painful to do, and typically is a very time-consuming process because there's going to be so many competing interests and other things that the teams need to worry about. In my experience as well, if you want to do a formal tabletop, it's got an incredibly long timeline. I know while I was still active, I think we were lucky if we could knock out one tabletop a quarter. And again, that was working at like the enterprise cybersecurity provider. So lots of moving parts, lots of like lower echelon coordination that needed to happen. Very frequently a pain, and just for the facilitator to define the scenario, especially at a broad enterprise level, means that there's a lot of stakeholders who need to be consulted to validate the scenario, right? And this last one, from what I have seen, and hashtag not all tabletops, I'm sure, for any of those who have been intimately involved and on the planning side of this, or have been, active, been in a current ops or a future ops role and have to do this sort of thing. They have a potential to devolve into check in the box paper exercises, right? Where it's just everything is laid out ahead of time, everything is scripted, everyone checks the box, says, yes, we have a piece of paper to take care of this. And it doesn't sort of live up to the spirit of the tabletop, which is supposed to be more interrogative of what your processes are than just, hey, thing X exists, we're good, check, move on. So what are we going to do about this? Let's go ahead and shrink this concept down instead of being this massive organization-wide thing. What if we, didn't script it? Let's just be a little fast and loose. Let's make it up. Let's do a little bit of improv. What if we limit it down just to the focus area of my individual team, or at least my individual sort of like sector of that? Importantly, what if we just have a little bit more fun with it instead of it being all of us dying on a video teleconference, waiting for our turn to unmute and say, yes, we would do this. Here's the document, mute, sit for another 30 minutes. And importantly, what if we tried to make this very time constrained and keep it to less than 30 minutes? For the sake of having something to call it, let's call it a tiny tabletop. So why does it work? By shrinking it down and limiting it just to, say, the cybersecurity analyst, or even more narrowly tailored to your incident response team or your SOC, or just to your like tier 1 network engineers or service desk, you make it manageable, right? You don't have this huge coordination problem that slows the entire process down. You can also tailor it to specific needs that aren't applicable to the entire enterprise, right? Some of those things that are sort of brought up in the broader enterprise ones get sort of glossed over because it is very much a high-level intra-organizational process examination. But there are certain things where you and your team might need to be very granular in how you respond to a type of incident. And there's just no time in the broader tabletop to really investigate that. But if you shrink it down, it's pretty easy to be like, what are actually like the low-level steps 1 through 5 that we need to do to respond to an alert that there's ransomware in the box. It also makes it iterable, and it's easy to integrate into a weekly or monthly schedule, depending on how busy your team is. I found that I was able to just, on days when there weren't fires we had to deal with, I could just get 30 minutes before lunch, get the team together in a couple of chairs or in a small conference room and work through one of these sort of like scenario-based tabletop exercises to, keep their skills sharp and keep everyone sort of thinking like an analyst. And importantly, a small team is going to be an agile team. It's just the nature of organization is the more people are involved, the more cumbersome it tends to be. So let's say that you're intrigued by this concept and you want to try running one of these tiny tabletops with your own team. The thing that you want to throw together is that this is going to be like a largely informal collaborative exercise. It's going to be not everyone sitting around the table. It should very much be a discussion, right? You're going to want to tailor it just to a single team or functional area. Again, if you're on a CERT, you want to limit it to the CERT, though you're going to obviously bring in the interconnections. You don't need to bring in someone from the IT side of the house. You don't need to pull in lawyers and legal while you're running this tabletop, right? You're going to run on an accelerated timeline, so I would recommend outside of like maybe the planning process that has a little bit more time on the left-hand side. In general, this is something that you can really put together quickly. Like I've put together some in less than an hour, just come up with the idea, jot down generally what my plan is going to be, and then get everyone around a table on the same day. And importantly is to avoid making it scripted, right? That facilitator is going to be responding to the choices your participants make. It should not be a strictly scripted exercise. It's going to be, as I'm going to kind of go into, very similar to how a good D&D game goes. So what are the things you need? You're going to need a bit of time, right? You have to block out the time to be able to get everybody together. A little bit of know-how, especially as the facilitator, there's an onus on you to be the one who is knowledgeable about the scenario you're throwing out there. Though I'll sort of get into how knowledgeable do you really need to be. And then a desire to lead and learn, right? That's just fundamentally, you need to want to bring everyone together and push this initiative just to make sure that there's someone who is a champion for the idea. And because if you're going to be the one facilitating it, there's a little bit more legwork you need to do compared to the analysts you're bringing into the room. Having said that, it is great if you also have in-depth familiarity with your team's tools and processes, any cross-functional processes that exist. So understanding what your team sort of has at their disposal in terms of ways they can respond to a type of incident, what the SOPs as they currently exist are, sort of what the ties you have with outside entities, other departments within your organization, what those are, knowing what those are ahead of time and being intimately familiar with that makes it so much easier to improv, right? Instead of sort of fumbling around or making something up. As well as having, if you have it, I know that we all struggle with it, well-written and maintained documentation or some other sort of like knowledge base like a wiki to ensure that you have some knowledge repository to keep everyone on the same page. They're all obviously a bit of a pain to maintain, but they're such a godsend when you're planning these things out because it means that you know what the expectation you should have for the answers you should sort of expect, right, during these tabletops from the analysts and engineers around the room. If you have playbooks, and I'm using that not necessarily in the orchestration automation sense of the word, but the sort of sequencing of how to respond to a type of incident, those things are great. I know a lot of people don't do that or just don't have the time to build them out or rely on the inherent expertise and experience of your team, which is great. I am just a firm believer that those playbooks are great for consistency of response and a great way to get new members up to speed on how your team operates. And finally, if you have a list of the key POCs outside your team, so knowing exactly who on the server side is the SME or the person to go to for questions or to perform certain actions you need to take during an incident, great thing to have. You don't need it, but again, these things sort of give you additional tools in your tool belt as you're planning out your TTX. So you want to throw these together and you're like, where do I start? So I would recommend you steal like a dungeon master. For those of you who aren't tabletop nerds or don't know what I mean by that, dungeon masters in a D&D game are the ones who sort of lay the scene and come up with the ideas that the players are going to engage with, right? Generally, because we are not all going to be artistic savants, we are going to steal from some existing lore or story or legend, and then just add a little bit of flavor and tweak it a little bit to give our players something fun to engage with, right? Likewise, I would recommend if you want to throw these together, don't try to be completely original, steal, right? Creatively. Look at your own incident management system, whether that's a ticketing system, whether that's something else, to see what sort of incidents that your team has dealt with in the past and how they sort of engage with it, as well as sort of like specific characteristics that you might want to tweak to see how your team would respond if certain facts of the investigation or incident were different. Likewise, look at the news. Look at what's hot on Mastodon or Twitter or whatever other thing is currently on fire in the news. That's pretty easy to go to, right? See who's been breached lately, how did it happen, look at some write-ups that have been going on, or new malware that has everyone spooked. Great source of inspiration if you're on the cybersecurity side of the house, right? Looking at, again, different reports as a website is fantastic, or any other published case studies or evolving security research to look at the cutting edge techniques or just novel CVEs that are coming out. Great thing to baseline, right? Because that's going to be of interest and interesting to your team generally, because it's not going to be the same rote. User got phished. What do we do? How do you remediate? It can give them something a little bit more novel that they might not see in their day-to-day incidents they're engaged with. Looking at your own security tools. So I wholeheartely stole this, I believe, from Chris Sanders whenever he on either a blog post or something he has in his analyst mindset in his analyst mindset course, of looking at the security tooling you have, look at the detections that are innate to it, and then asking a series of sort of like cognitive questions about what does this alert mean? How should I engage with it? What are the next steps that I should take, type of thing to get you thinking. It's a great thing to look at what the baseline things that are already built into your tooling, or even the custom detections or analytics you've built out, as a launching point for the scenario you're putting together, right? And finally, of course, you can just make stuff up. Like, sky's the limit. There's no rules to all this. Actually, yeah, the risk registrar is also a great idea. I didn't even think of that one. What are the things that you have assumed, and what are your mitigations that are notionally in place, and what happens if they fail, right? Session prep, right? So you've got your idea, you've got a kernel of a good idea that you want. What do you do? So you want to figure out the physical logistics, right? So block out the time for the team, reserve that time on their Outlook calendar or however you do it, just to dedicate that time so it doesn't get messed with or pushed to the right by competing interests. It's a lot easier to schedule something if you have it on a schedule, right? And if needed, if you're all in the same physical space, reserve that space so that you have somewhere for everyone to meet. I've done it out in the open in a cubicle farm, works relatively fine. Reserving a conference room gives you a little bit more privacy and makes everyone feel a bit more at ease, that they aren't going to be, no one's going to be dropping eaves on them. And if they say something stupid, having that privacy. And of course, if you're geographically dispersed, just get that Teams meeting or Zoom, whatever your poison of choice from a video teleconferencing solution standpoint is. Just make sure you have that sort of blocked off. Do a little bit, again, you can kind of treat some of this as optional. I would recommend it because it makes it more realistic and that adds more value to your team. Do that technical research and review your TTPs and SOPs to understand both for the scenario that I've come up with, how would it actually function so that I can figure out which direction or what responses I need to kind of prepare if my analysts go in a particular direction, as well as how do we currently state we should respond to this sort of thing. Ideally, you want to sort of like know, or on paper, we say we would respond to it this way, so that if your analysts come up with a different solution, you can figure out where that delta is, whether it's your documentation is faulty, whether it's a training issue, what have you. And finally, you want to sort of loosely define your event sequencing and sort of like the various hooks for your analysts to look into. So it's sort of like a narrative concept, but it's going to be, so taking an example of, we'll start with a phishing incident, right? The inciting incident is going to be one of your server admins received a phishing email that was flagged by the system but was not quarantined or deleted by your email security appliance. You start there and then you think, okay, what are the directions that my team might go to with that as a launching point? Obviously, like there's a couple different ways they could go. They could go, well, let me review the email security appliance to see what it has. Let me investigate how the email came in and look at the metadata within the mail header to figure out its point of origin. They could scope the user identity for suspicious things, unusual logins, external foreign IPs, or impossible travel alerts. They can investigate the host or try and determine on what host did this guy interact with the email to figure that. So those are the sort of things you'd want to loosely plan in your head so you can anticipate what they might do and you don't get sort of flustered by any curveballs they throw your way because you've anticipated a lot of the directions they might go. And finally, if you have someone that is a peer that you'd sort of want to get this feedback from, go ahead and reach out to them, have them sort of review what you've done and see if there's either things that aren't as clear, things you could tighten up better, competing viewpoints that might be interesting you'd want to incorporate. All right. So we come to the day when you want to do this thing. You have your team, you're all gathered together. What do you want to do? So you want to lay out the goals of the tiny tabletop. That's generally going to be a mixture of, hey, we are going to walk through the scenario. We're going to talk through how we would respond to it. End state generally is going to be that we have identified how we would respond to it, what tools are at our disposal, and any gaps or weaknesses we currently have that we weren't aware of. You're going to want to emphasize the relaxed nature of the exercise, right? This isn't a place for people to feel awkward or embarrassed if they come up with an idea that turns out to not be based in reality. You'd like them to explore that, so you take it as a learning moment. You don't want to blame someone if they were the one who worked an incident, and that's what you used as the baseline. This isn't like a, well, you should have done it this way type exercise. It should be like, no, this is, let's have the opinions. Let's have a meeting of the minds. Let's discuss this. No, this will not have any ramifications on how we see you as a peer or on your future career with the company type thing. You want to provide that discussion framework and I would say iterate that there are going to be forced decision points. I'll sort of cover this again in the next slide, but you don't want to have unlimited time to talk, right? Treat it as if there is an incident ongoing and force those decisions from the team. So it isn't just a bunch of either bloviating or just abstract academic discussion where you're like, hey, you're responding to a real incident. What do you do? And optionally, if you have a big enough team, choose one person to take those meeting notes. If not, just make sure you have notepad, digital or physical, and take notes about what the team decides to do. But having a dedicated scribe while you're running the thing just helps sort of split that cognitive load, unless you focus on facilitating while someone else documents sort of what the team comes up with, excuse me. So with that groundwork there, you're going to describe your inciting incident, and then importantly, you're going to fade into the background. Ideally, you are there to provide guidance, clarification, but you want to let the team discuss amongst themselves and not try to force their discussions, right? You are there to facilitate, not to drive necessarily, right? You want to force them to run through those cognitive skills and think through what they want to accomplish. Importantly, you are the clock, right? You want to force them to make choices. Everyone wants to always come up with a perfect response or what have you. You want to get them comfortable making suboptimal decisions based on the limited information that they have gleaned. The worst thing you can have, especially on the IR side, is someone who waits 3 days because they're not sure and allows someone to either penetrate deeper into your network or just do more bad things on your network. You want to throw complications at them, right? So you're the bad guy in the scenario. You're everything that's going to go wrong. You're all of the, hey, you guys are responding to this incident. It's the next day. Tom, who's the senior analyst, is out sick because something goes wrong. The other three of you, what do you do? Things like that. Or just like, hey, a tool breaks or something is offline. Throw those complications at them to get them thinking. Again, you're going to be the problem. You're going to be everything that goes wrong with their scenario. And ultimately, you should also have a little bit of fun, right? So what I typically did, especially if it was a thing that always happened, it would either be I make up a persona, usually when I was still active, right? Make up of like an intel officer who was a dweeb or something, because we had a bit of a contentious relationship with our some of our intel section, or something like that, where like throw in some elements of fun, something to keep them engaged. If there's in jokes you can throw in there, if there's something like that, great thing to sprinkle in and sort of not make it just dry walking through the incident. Well, I am generally excited about all aspects of cybersecurity. I know that's not the case for everybody. So having something that you can do for a little bit of fun is great. So, you come towards the end of the session, it's about 30 minutes in, try to find a natural conclusion point. What I found is that you're not going to simulate, obviously, because you're running on such a short timeline, you're not going to have time to fully engage the entire incident lifecycle or every aspect of the cyber kill chain or anything fun like that. You might get through like 2 or 3 from like wherever you start in the kill chain of like initial access and then moving through to execution on the host. You might start in the middle where, hey, there's malware on the box, and they might go to the left or to the right of that and the remediation aspects, but you're not going to be able to walk through a full thing necessarily, right? So just try to find a point where they have addressed whatever step they're on and sort of draw the exercise to a close. You might not necessarily resolve every incident, but that's fine. You can either pick it up again next session, or you can, just take it as, hey, here's the lessons learned we have from this part of the scenario that we ran through. You want to debrief everyone, what worked, what didn't work, or what just like clearly was bad, and things where you're like, oh, we've got a problem here because we don't know how we handle this particular step, right? You're going to want to document any of those identified wins or gaps. So any knowledge shared, something that frequently happens, right? There's going to be a team, or on your team, there's going to be a couple of analysts who have dealt with scenario X over and over again and become the go-to guy because they're always the ones dealing with it. If that knowledge just sort of like gets centralized in that person and not spread across the team and not properly documented, you're sort of at risk of losing that tribal knowledge. So ideally, you want to document any of that knowledge shared for future preservation and update your documentation, any fun stuff like that. Any new ideas generated where someone comes up with a creative or clever solution to a problem that you currently don't have, jot that down so that you can engage that idea and see if it can be fleshed out into something more actionable. If there was any uncertainty about how particular technologies work, so if you're not familiar with how your EDR solution works or how you would use it to grab, say, a memory dump, document like, hey, we aren't fully good on how to capture memory dumps to do memory analysis for an incident. This is a weak area that we need to find ways to shore up. And then any divergent responses. If your team had conflicting views about how to respond, note those down and figure out if it's divergent in a bad way or just these are different approaches that can be done. And again, sort of like documenting your shared knowledge about how to engage in a type of incident or find a particular atomic element of information that would be interesting for your team. So you've done the fun part. Now for the part that actually gives this value, because they're fun as they are, but if you are just doing these things and not taking it as an opportunity for growth, it's not as good as it could be. So you want to review sort of how the tabletop went and what the responses were and see how closely does it match your documentation, right? If your SOPs and how your analysts respond don't align, you've got a problem. It might not be a bad problem, but you've got a problem. Either your documentation sucks or it's out of date, or your team is a bunch of cowboys and you need to figure out why they're being cowboys and not following the documentation. Bonus points, if you have the time, look at any incidents that match your tabletop and see how you actually responded in real time, in the real world, to see, hey, we talk about it this way, it's documented this way, and this is what we actually did. Because it's never fun to find out that those 3 things do not fully align, but it's an important thing to know. Again, just try and identify if there are issues or problems or just other things that need to be tightened up within the team. If there were any action items generated from the team debrief that you guys straight up didn't know, so that could be things like, we know that we need to take the server offline and get an image of it, but we don't know who we talk to. We don't know how it gets shipped from the data center in California those would be things where now that you've got the time and you've wrapped up the tabletop, you'd want to find the answer to those particular questions. Finally, want to validate any of those assumptions that you made. I think I kind of glossed over it, but there's sort of while you're running these things, there's going to be questions or directions your team goes where you won't know the answer as the facilitator. And as I was told by one of the S3 bubbas whenever I had to work through these tabletops, sometimes you just have to push the I believe button and move on, right? You don't have time to engage with all the nuances if it detracts too much from what you're trying to do. But after you've done these things, great time to make sure the assumptions you made are accurate. Because again, sort of going to that, how does this match with the real world after running through this talk, this discussion, you want to make sure your priors are correct so that whenever you're involved in a real incident that mirrors one of your TTXs, it's actually useful and provided value to your team, right? Afterwards, you're going to want to develop any action items based off the knowledge that you developed as well, right? So if you walk through a particular type of malware and you discovered there were gaps in your detection or things that wouldn't work, you want to take the time and now write those analytics to cover those gaps. You want to either, whether that's novel detections, whether that's discovering what additional telemetry you would need to turn on or ingest to be able to action on those, excuse me, or any other sort of gaps. That would be one of those things that you want to capture and improve upon, right? If there's any repetitive tasks or anything where there's pain points, to use an example, we always had to manually review emails that were emailed to our spam mailbox back in the day, right? Which would consume an analyst for basically an afternoon on a regular basis to go through that, put in the ticket for review, close it out. Those things, those repetitive tasks, those pain points where your analysts are like, this is boring and takes too long, is likely a great opportunity for automation. It might not necessarily be like full having a SOAR platform built up or building out all the logic apps in Azure if you want to be high speed, low drag, but it could be a thing of like, look, can we script this somehow? Is there some feature in a tool we already pay for that could be used to make this less painful or to collate that information for us and reduce the time an analyst has to spend on that? And then finally, if there's relationships with external teams that were identified and are currently sort of informal, like, hey, Joe's been working, Joe's been in the IT department for 30 years, and he's the guy we go to if we need to modify our web proxy list. That's great. That's a great relationship to have. Let's find a way to formalize that and get something on paper and agree across the departments that this is the team and here's how we will notify this department when we need to make modifications to the web proxy. Informal relationships, great tool, big fan, but you want something on paper and something tangible. So again, there isn't ambiguity at a time when ambiguity would slow everybody down. Finally, especially if you are in a management or leadership position, you want to sort of collapse all these things into qualitative and quantitative measures. For two reasons. One, having those measurements sort of gives you good feedback about the utility these things are providing and whether or not you need to tweak how you're running tabletops if you're running them consistently. And it gives you something to give to your higher leadership to justify these action items or justify this work that your team is doing that would otherwise be like, why aren't they on, hands on keyboard to do something that matters? You want to sort of develop these measures to be able to provide that feedback and measure these things. So things that you want to capture on a qualitative level are going to be, hey, what new SOPs have we developed, or what tangible updates have emerged as a result of this process? What gaps have we identified and remediated, or new mitigations we put in place, right? What improvement, if you're someone who uses the MITRE ATT&CK model to sort of evaluate your security posture or security program, mapping these things to MITRE ATT&CK is a great way to sort of speak a common language and measure, here's how much better we are at detecting initial access attempts, lateral movement attempts, et cetera, and any new processes that are generated. And then quantitative, it's the good old good old ones. Again, speaking more from a cybersecurity standpoint, but if you work in IT proper, you can come up with your own measures, and some of these are going to be kind of similar, right? Of, hey, we have reduced our mean time to detect, mean time to respond by X percentage, and reduced our mean time to remediation in category X by X number of days, hours, minutes, seconds, or to those measures, is showing value to people who speak numbers, which is going to be most of your management, right? You can obviously come up with whatever other measures you want, other things that are pertinent to your team or your program. But I would highly encourage you to find a way to capture these measures and sort of produce a report on that, to get buy-in, to get leadership buy-in, and also to help also get you resourcing that you might need. I would recommend, if you can, if this works out for your team, make it a part of your normal battle rhythm. Maybe like, hey, every Thursday before lunch, someone is going to run one of these tabletops for us. It doesn't have to be you. In fact, I would encourage you to rotate this facilitator role across your team, for a couple of different reasons. One, diversity of viewpoints is fantastic. People will have seen things differently, will have different backgrounds and experiences that inform how they interact with a particular incident. It also is a great training tool and development tool for your more junior analysts to put them on the spot, have them sort of do this kind of research, talk the team through things, and give them a little bit more confidence if they are the sort of analyst who doesn't like to be the center of attention or doesn't like to come to the fore. It's a great way to sort of force them to build those skills. Particularly, again, if you're still active duty, great tool for your junior NCOs, junior enlisted, but in general, just like any junior analyst or engineer, great for skill building. And then finally, if your team was kind of wishy-washy about it, they weren't having a great time with it, see if you can figure out like what's the missing ingredient to really get them engaged, right? Because without their buy-in, it very much turns into a sort of a slog, and no one likes to just lose 30 minutes to all sit there and be curmudgeons. So sort of in conclusion, right? Traditional tabletops have a great value at the enterprise level, but due to their intra-organizational nature, right, the local problems kind of get lost in the 50,000 foot view, right? But taking that concept and scaling it down, I've found, especially because for those of you who don't know, the Marine Corps had made 1721, the DCO MOS, entry level when it had previously been lat move only. So we now had people fresh out of the initial ascension pipeline coming in instead of more experienced IT guys or skilled guys coming in. So I needed a way to train my guys up. I needed ways to evaluate them, and I needed ways to sort of help them build those skills and build that mindset that I needed them to have to operate independently. I've found great positive impacts. Hopefully you guys will as well. Great ways for that team building, for exploring less commonly encountered incidents and improving the overall security posture of your organization from the cybersecurity side, or improving your sort of operational uptime and ability to respond to incidents on the IT side, right? References, additional resources. So if you want to look at the cyber exercise or TTX stuff, so NIST SB 884 sort of documents that. MITRE has a cyber exercise playbook. I don't have them listed here. CISA also has a number of incident playbooks. So they are the 50,000 square foot version of this, of ransomware, flooding, what have you. Chris Sanders has an excellent article on the importance of questions and investigation. I would actually just generally recommend his material in general, not sponsored, but he has spent a lot of time thinking about these sort of like cognitive processes of analysts and how to develop those skills. And has really engaged with it a lot. His PhD thesis is also great to read if you have the time. And like me, if you're like someone who enjoys reading long, dry treatises, it's not that dry, but not everyone wants to read a PhD thesis. I don't begrudge you that. And a great tool as well, if you don't want to be the one who throws all this together, is of course Black Hills Information Security's Backdoors and Breaches, which is basically a set of cards that you can use to sort of generate an incident or scenario on your own. It also includes a set of complications, but it sort of walks through the various stages you would have in an incident, and is a great tool to spin one of these up yourself if you want something to start with. But with that concludes my talk. Thank you all so much for coming and listening, and thank you, VetSec, for letting me speak. We got a couple minutes left, so if anyone has any questions or comments or anything else, feel free to drop them in chat. But thank you all so much for coming. And thank you, Brad, for dropping the link in the chat to the TTX packages. And if you want to learn more about D&D, dndbeyond.com or any of the Wizards of the Coast stuff. I could nerd out about that plenty, but